The Cloudcast is sponsored by Intel Cloud for All, driving the creation of tens of thousands of clouds.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast, coming to you live from the massive studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Aaron, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good, doing good.
I think we're, what are we, 3 or 4 shows in a row now? We're both doing the show.
We're to the point we're losing count. So
I know.
How have you been? You're actually, are you traveling anytime soon? What's your deal?
I was in San Francisco last week. I got to go out to the Pacific Crest Emerging Technology Summit, which was kind of fun. I got to hang out with some people. Hung out with like Mark Imbriaco and Jeremy Edberg from used to be at Netflix, now runs Cloud Native, and some other folks. So that was kind of fun. Got to talk to some finance people about what's going on in the market, and it's always interesting to hear from investors who run these, multi-billion-dollar funds, and they ask these questions about various companies, and you sort of realize like the minutia that we get into they don't care. They just, they want to know winners and they want to know losers and they want to know trends and the nuanced stuff. Kind of, they're like, I could care less, man. I got bigger things to worry about.
So what you're telling me is there's no details in billions.
No, apparently not. Apparently most of our lives are completely useless nuance and minutia. So,
all right,
but it was
there's
fun.
The show for the week. All right, thanks.
So, it's good, and I'm home for a bit, and then I got to go out to San Francisco again for the Google event. So get back on the road. So I think I picked up your travel schedule for this year. So
yeah,
you're not traveling
it sounds that way. No, not hardly traveling at all, and I'm actually enjoying it.
Yeah. So tonight's show is going to be kind of fun. It's a topic I've kind of been wanting to talk about for a while, and it was interesting. So there's this thing called AWS Lambda, which got announced about a year ago, and people call it serverless computing, and there's a bunch of names for it. And for a while I was like, okay, I don't have any clue what it is, but it's sort of interesting, and we'll dig into it. And what's been interesting is over the last maybe 3 or 4 weeks, like I've run into probably a half dozen people who literally like kind of run their business, using this as part of it, and we'll get into what it is. And the other cool thing is our guest tonight, who we'll introduce in just a second. Not only is he in North Carolina, which is great, so I think it's our second show with North Carolina people. But I've been, it's the weird thing about Twitter where you're kind of following people for a while, and then your lives kind of intersect at some, there's some actual intersection rather than following them. So I've been following our guest for a long time. So I'll go ahead and introduce him. Joe Emison, welcome to the show. Joe is
very excited to be here.
Yeah. Like we were saying, we're catching everybody when they're done with their sort of day tasks for the night, and then they can get going to stuff. But Joe is founder and Chief Technology Officer of BuildFax. You're out in Asheville, North Carolina, which is one of the most beautiful places in the world. Give us a little. And
even though it's like 4 hours away, because it's in North Carolina, we're going to call it local.
Yeah, exactly.
Because compared to most of our guests, that's local.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I used to read some of your stuff. You write some stuff for the New Stack, and you've written in other places, and I always sort of see your bio, and you started a company called BuildFax, and for whatever reason in the back of my mind, I always went, that's weird. He's super up to speed with technology, but he's working on fax stuff. So he must work on something interesting, but it didn't make sense. And then I kind of dug into it. Aaron, you're going to like his company because it's all about helping people, figure out, it's essentially the Carfax for builders, I think, if I'm understanding it right.
Yeah. And, we do, there's some great spammers who nominate us for, best fax company. And are asking us to like pay to be part of that honor. So we have the only national database of building permits, and we have monetized that in a number of different ways. The original thought was that it was going to be this great consumer product, sort of Carfax for homes, and it really is the closest thing to that. And so you can go to buildfax.com and you can get a BuildFax report. And really what we know is that it helps people understand between one sale of a home and, say, you're looking to buy it now, what permitted construction has happened there that would impact the value of the home.
Right.
But actually, the majority of revenue that BuildFax gets is in helping insurance companies understand home condition and the age of the roof and the roof condition on homes, which are big predictors of whether you're going to have losses on your home.
Yeah.
So those are our largest customers. So it's been a fun experience.
Yeah, it's one of those industries that, having just done I did a big home renovation. Aaron's wife's in real estate, so we sort of are dealing with this all the time. Like, it doesn't feel like a super high tech industry, but it's one that's not going away. It goes through all sorts of growth spurts and ups and downs, and so it's part of this sort of new, I think, revolution where we're seeing technology get part of these industries that felt like they were very physical or maybe not as technical as in the past. So that's very cool. We should dig into that. But what we really want to dig into tonight is some of your background, because there's this thing called serverless computing and serverless applications, which you've got a bunch of background in. In fact, you're actually giving a talk at Interop about. So before we dive into the technology, like, why would anybody care about sort of serverless? Is it a buzzword, or is there like a real need for this stuff?
Oh yeah, it's wonderful. It has a wonderful business application, and I do think that there are a lot of things that we in technology get really excited about just because they're cool. But to me, serverless is not one of those things. It's one of those. It's an immensely powerful tool that we can use, and so I think what's most useful in thinking about the power of serverless is to think about how we have gone from needing expertise within our organizations pre-cloud to knowing how to provision hardware, do capacity planning, stand up servers, and manage replacement of failing drives in a RAID array and things like that, to now in an Amazon world, in a public cloud world, you don't need to worry about any of those things, but you still need to worry about the virtual machines. And even in, say, something like Heroku with platform as a service, you have to worry about your dynos, and they can go down. And so really what serverless applications let you do is that you get rid of pager duty. To put it another way, if your application goes down, there's nothing you can do about it. It's something that is entirely, the uptime and the availability is entirely controlled, is entirely outside of your control. And that's a good thing, because in general, in the same way that Amazon is very good at keeping your hardware online, good serverless application platforms are really good at keeping those online. And so what that lets you do as an organization is that you can focus on your application. You can focus on the end user instead of having to have an expertise around keeping servers running or monitoring VMs.
Yeah. So it's really, so if you kind of go through an evolution in my head, right? You had physical data centers way back in the day, and you're managing physical as well as operations. And then you moved to cloud, and you took away the physical, but you're still managing operations. And then now in serverless, you are effectively taking away operations as well.
Yeah, it's the closest thing. It almost is making good on the promise of platform as a service that none of the platform as a service vendors actually ever were successful at doing. Right? The promise of platform as a service was you write code and you deploy it and it just runs. And you were never able to do that with any of the platform as a service vendors, really. But with serverless, you are. It just turns out it looks different from platform.
Yeah. So give us the basics, because I know, and there's a lot of services out there now. But even like when Amazon first came out with theirs, it was, they basically said, like, look, if there's an event or there's an action that you want to happen, or you just kind of want to run some code, this is what you do. But give us the basics. Give us an example of where you would use it, and then, pick any of the services, maybe the ones that you like. Like, what do you actually do to make this do something for you, to make it work?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that just as we had to change the way we were thinking about architecting applications when we went from the data center to the public cloud, I think we also have to think about changing how we architect applications in serverless. And I actually think one of the big problems around the way vendors approach serverless, and if you look at the Lambda and its Me Too's, Google's announced its Cloud Functions, and IBM has its version. they're very focused on this. I need to run code in a way that I don't need to maintain a VM. And so that tends to be what people think of with serverless is, okay, well, when I had a server and I had to run code on it. And so now I need to be able to run code somewhere else. How am I going to get that code to run? Well, I'm going to hook it up to an API, like an API gateway, or I have to run it on a cron job. That tends to be the way most people think about serverless initially. I actually think if you go back and you think about application architecture, what serverless really says is think about thick clients, right? Like apps on phones, but then also single page web apps that are using JavaScript frameworks like Angular or React. And then eliminate that middle tier that everyone's so used to that's running on a server. And then the actual Lambda part of it, or all of these other running code on a server, actually tends to be very small. In the serverless applications that I oversee and architect, the Lambda part of it is tiny. The key part of those applications actually are all the other services that make them run. So you need a place to host your static assets. One of my favorite services here is Netlify. You need a place to put data, and I like Firebase a lot for that. You oftentimes need an image store. So Cloudinary is an amazing image store. A lot of times you need to be able to search. Algolia is a great way to search. And a lot of times you need authentication, and Auth0 is a wonderful service that handles authentication against LinkedIn and managing users. So I tend to think about more holistically about I'm building an application, it's being delivered to users. What's the range of services that I can hook into? And so this excitement about Lambda and the excitement about the serverless framework to me feels like not enough people are actually writing really full-fledged applications and thinking about the extent of serverless with them.
Yeah, so that's fascinating. So I'll give. So way back when I was at the AWS conference when they announced all of this, and it was interesting to kind of both wrap my head around it and the crowd kind of with their impressions afterwards with talking to some folks, because it was so funny. Listening to everything you just said and kind of going back to my impressions of it, they're just so vastly different.
That's great.
and because for me originally it was like I had stated earlier, it was simply completely removing the operations aspect of AWS completely to the where it was almost like charging per CPU cycle kind of model, right? But it almost seemed like, all right, all they were doing is removing a whole bunch of operations, and oh, by the way, you're pretty much locking yourself into AWS. It almost seemed like more of an easier, more developer friendly, oh, by the way, we might lock you in play, as opposed to everything you just said.
It's interesting because to a large extent, there's much less lock in when all you're doing is just uploading some code.
Right. Yeah. And now that you've said all of that, I'm like, oh, that's yeah. Yep. I see where you're going.
But yeah, I do think that if it just like when people first came to the cloud from the enterprise or from the data center, and they said, well, this is silly. It's just a VM on the cloud. It's not different. And they weren't thinking about, well, I can provision these things via API within minutes, and I have an infinite number of them, and I've got this ability to do this amazing horizontal scaling, and I can get these amazing availability scenarios. And they just weren't thinking about it. I think, too, when people go to serverless, they say, okay, well, I'm used to an application that has where I'm running a web server and Ruby on Rails, and I'm serving out documents, and they're saying, well, gosh, it's going to be a real pain in the butt to like shove my Ruby on Rails application into something like Lambda. Like that just seems like, why would that be good? And in fact, like Google App Engine is that thing for Python and Django, and Snapchat runs on it. It works well, but it's not. I really see serverless as this paradigm around how do I have a thick front end? I put a lot of my business logic in the front end, which again is statically served assets, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or it's an app that's running on a phone. So that's code that runs on the client side. And then how do I write that code so it can hook into all these, like a network of services that I can just pay for? And what it means is that, I've gone from paying, typical application launch would be, say, $4,000 or $5,000 a month to Amazon Web Services. I mean, that's what I was overseeing for years. And now, I pay almost nothing to Amazon Web Services, increasingly less. And I've got, some money to Algolia, some money to Cloudinary, some money to Netlify. Again, all of these specific services that have great uptime and serve these specific purposes. And it means that when I write my client-side code, I really write specific client-side code for my use. And I don't have to write all sorts of, connective tissue code or just standard stuff that everybody has to write in every application. That really has dropped to a minimum. 95% of the code is specific to the application and the user that I have. It makes me much more nimble and much more responsive to users.
And you brought up that's an interesting point in the fact that you kind of mentioned it there, but I want to highlight it a little further too. It changes the cost model in the fact that you just don't have a bunch of AWS instances just sitting there. You're paying for them even if they're not doing anything per se. And yeah, granted, you can do some scale up, scale down, but you still have a static, run rate bill, if you will, per month. But by spreading it out and doing this in a very different way and spreading it out to these different services, you saw a very significant savings to the business, but also were able to do all these other advantages of writing the application in a different way as well.
Yeah, and I don't actually know if there was a massive dollar savings in terms of the spend. So it's probably 60-70% of what I would have paid Amazon, maybe 80%. But Amazon's getting much less. These other services are getting it. But there's the cost savings is really, I don't have pager duty. I mean, I just don't. The site is up. And my application teams, there's a model of you want your developers to run your servers, which Amazon espouses and I have done for many years. And that's great, but you do need to worry about what happens if something goes down at 4 a.m. When you build applications this way, you can't do anything about it if it goes down at 4 a.m, and they generally stay up. So it frees you. It gives you this wonderful focus, and you really can be a very developer led. Or the product can be very developer and product led, and it has no sort of crusty IT guy complaining to everybody about, no, you can't do that because that's going to have an impact on availability.
That makes sense. So we always talk about what works, but so I'm going to ask the flip side question real quick. What doesn't work as well, or what needs to evolve? Because, as dealing with all these technologies, it's still early days, right? What are the kind of challenges you faced in moving to this architecture?
Yeah, there's some weird annoyances, although I will say, and in addition to being CTO of BuildFax, I work with a lot of sister companies. We're owned by DMGT, which is a British corporation, and we have a number of sister companies who do other things in like commercial real estate and commercial properties in the U.S. And so we've been developing some serverless applications that do essentially like a Zillow for commercial real estate. And there's one that's live right now. Anybody can go to called PropertyTourPro.com, which lets you build a tour book if you are a commercial tenant rep broker. And those are hosted serverlessly. And I would say the biggest pain that we've had in building those applications has actually been good senior software engineers who just don't like it and feel like it can't be done right. I think there's a real bias in senior software engineers to believe that the back end is the cool part, the place where the really good people go, and the front end stuff is kind of for the beginners or the not fun people or the not awesome engineers, which is ridiculous because the front end is what drives the value to the customer, and that's the customer interaction, and that's user experience. So, I mean, I think that's nuts, but, I've had some issues with that. And then beyond that, there are situations in which you need to have private code. So specifically, you often will have to make API calls to services as part of your code, and you've got a private key that you can't make public. And so that's something that if you put in client-side code, even if you obfuscate it and send it out to a browser to execute, someone could see what that private key is. So you often need to run that in a protected way. And that's where something like Lambda or there's a startup called StackHut that's got a nice service that I think is better than Lambda. There's Auth0 has something called WebTask that I think is better for that purpose. And so there are a bunch of solutions, but that's a little annoying. We also run Firebase queues, and we actually do have a server in one of our applications. It's not customer facing, but it does have queue workers that monitor a queue and that do work against what gets pushed to the queue. And we found that we needed that. And then one other point is that if you need to make an API endpoint for your application to other users or to other applications, you are going to have to establish that somewhere through like API Gateway or Lambda, or we have done it with WebTask in order to get a decent API endpoint. So there are some things you have to work around, but honestly, we haven't been thwarted in any functionality. It feels pretty mature to me, or it has been possible and even easy to do essentially everything we've needed to do.
Yeah. So let me ask this, because again, I'm my brain's spinning a little bit trying to just figure out some things. And like Aaron said, I think I had this perception that this was, a little bit of, okay, we're simply moving something that used to run on a VM or in a container, which may have been a heavy back-end application, over to something that, you just don't worry about the infrastructure. But you're kind of talking about it in the context of sort of flipping that around, making the client side more, and then there's this sort of, web of interconnected services on the back end, which is sort of normal. One of the things that people would talk about some of the serverless stuff was they would talk about it with things like IoT, which still means a million different things to different people and so forth. But does that same sort of paradigm work, where I think people sort of thought, okay, serverless was maybe like it just does one or two tasks, it's the equivalent of a script or something. Is that maybe not necessarily going to be the case, where you've got lighter weight clients doing one or two monitored things, they're going to send some data up, and then this process does something? Or is that another use case that just maybe is for other cases, other uses?
So it's very interesting. I love seeing it. It reminds me of when the public cloud was first, when Amazon was first out there. The thing that all of the tech journalists talked about was cloud bursting.
Yeah.
Like, okay, here's the deal. Black Friday, here's what's going to happen. You're going to get a lot of, you're going to be running your data center, but suddenly, magically, servers are going to appear in the cloud, and they're going to handle all that extra traffic, and by the way, the network is going to be totally reliable, and you're not going to have database latency. You're totally going to replicate that database fine. Like, no one, as far as I know, no one has ever cloud bursted ever, right? I mean, that's a fantasy, and that persisted for years. I think that the things you're talking about are more real than cloud bursting, and I do think if we're, let's say 5 years from now, I think when we look back at serverless, or what if it gets a new name, we'll find out. But we'll say the first instance of serverless was parse, and it was apps. And you cannot go and find a how to write iOS apps course on Udemy or like a book or anything. If you go Google how to write iOS apps and you go find that book or that series of tutorials, every single one of them will have one of its first apps. It will talk to you about how to set up parse and how to connect to parse and how you're going to store data in parse. So you've got somewhere on the internet to store data and some way to collaborate and interact with other users of your app. That was it. And that I think is a great example of and it's like, or if you remember the app Yo, the terribly written app Yo, where you can only say Yo to other people, that thing is backed by Parse. And that's sort of an application that would not have existed without Parse, because it allowed that developer, and also like Flappy Bird, right? It allowed a developer who knew nothing about servers, nothing about cloud, nothing about remote. They just sign up for the service and they could use it, right? That's how those started. And I do think that like IoT, if it's similarly, if you're a developer or you're a company and you don't understand how to keep servers up, you don't understand software architecture, you don't understand high availability, being able to use a serverless backend or a backend as a service to store your IoT data is absolutely a good gateway drug. And I guess what I'm saying from my perspective is those are nice and cute, but we've been doing this for a while. I mean, Parse is now old enough to have been shut down, right? So, I mean, 3 years ago, we were using Parse. I guess what I'm saying is that we have now Parse and a number of other, and all these services that have cropped up have enabled this new way, this new, better, faster way of writing applications, this serverless way of writing applications that is just going to be more and more emergent because it has such a core business value. It allows, in the same way that Parse allowed that Yo developer to know nothing except barely how to write an app, and suddenly that exploded. In the same way, we empower developers through serverless. They don't understand anything about Amazon Web Services at all. The learning curve on being able to build a highly scalable, highly available app that has all sorts of crazy, wonderful features is very close to us. And I know, every time that happens, we empower those developers. And we do that because software is eating the world. Every company is becoming a software company. And so if you are a company and you want to win, you need to empower your developers to build great software quickly. And what you want to do is just make that easy. So why would you make people manage VMs if you don't have to?
Yeah. No, it makes sense. And there's another guy I wanted to have on the show. I have a friend. We got to talking about some stuff, and people that listen to the show would know who he was. I'm not supposed to say his name, but he was telling me he had a relative who ran a small business, and basically they were talking one night over dinner, and he said, "Hey, I've got this problem. I have this sort of common problem. It had to do with how he managed sales contacts and just common stuff that everybody has." And he, my friend, the technical guy, basically, sort of knew some of the PaaS platforms, knew stuff like Cloud Foundry and some things, and sort of said, well, I think I could hack you together some things, and then started writing it, where he ended up using Lambda on the back end, but he said, look, the Lambda piece didn't really matter, but the way he explained it, which is exactly what you said, was everything he focused on was solve this business problem, and there was nothing that he was focused on, which was, manage capacity, manage I/O, manage this, that, and the other. It was just simply like he could draw it on a napkin, and he went, here's the business process I want to happen. Here's where I want technology to kick in. And the way he explained it to me was exactly what you said. You're only focused on make this application and make it solve some business problem. So yeah, I think, just given his background, and he's not a hardcore developer, I think once people start to understand this stuff, I think the light bulb will come on. And like you said, it will become something that all kinds of businesses go, cool, that's something I can add a feature for. I can add an application for very, very simply.
Yeah.
So Joe, let me ask you this real quick. So you mentioned earlier, you said, there's some other services out there that are better than Lambda. What does that mean? What is the yardstick by which you measure serverless? Right? Like, what are the features or lack of features that, would have made it more complex? Like, when you say that, what exactly does a statement like that mean?
So I'm entirely concerned about the developer experience. So to me, the question is, I'm a developer. I'm trying to get something out the door, and I'm trying to get something out the door that I can, that I can connect to my repository. Usually GitHub. I can run code review on it. I can run automated tests on it. I can write, quality code easily, and it fits in with my existing workflow that I'm using. And so to use WebTask as an example, or StackHut is similar here. I mean, if you want to deploy a WebTask, I believe you type WT, and you just this is all Node.js stuff. So you're usually using Gulp or Grunt as a developer tool, and there's just this nice Node package manager ecosystem. So you just run a command and it deploys your code, and you've got all sorts of ways that you can write tests on it very easily locally. Now with Lambda, because it's hooked in with all Amazon Web Services, and Amazon Web Services is very keen on leveraging all of its services everywhere, that means that you have to deal with IAM, which is just a complexity nightmare. I mean, I don't know anybody who finds IAM even remotely easy to use. I've audited some configurations. I've never seen anybody with least user privilege on IAM. People end up granting over permissions, excessive permissions in IAM because they can't figure out how to do it narrowly. And it's very confusing. So you have to deal with that. The way that you typically have had to deploy to Lambda is you have to do it through the console, which is ridiculous. And so there are tools now, right, that make that easier. But it's and then you need API gateway to even connect to the thing. And you've got to set all that up and interact with it. And it's hard to test in place also. So again, there's toolkits. I mean, the serverless, which was JAWS, makes it a bit easier. But when you compare it to something like StackHut or WebTask, from my perspective, it's just why. I mean, it's fundamentally it's because Amazon has this ecosystem. I think Amazon's strategy has been every bit of complexity that you IT people have always had, we'll give you here so you can switch over. But the downside to that is that all that complexity remains. So
interesting. Well, let me wrap this up a little bit so we don't get too long in the show. And this is I'm a little bit biased in asking this question because I'm the track chair for Cloud Connected Interop, and you're giving a 4-hour session on it. If anybody who's going to Interop in May, give us the basics. You're giving a talk on building serverless applications. What are they going to learn? What are they going to walk away with? Give us the Cliff Notes version of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm doing that with Jeremy Edberg of Cloud Native. And So he's going to be talking about Yeobot, and he's going to be talking about Lambda more. And I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to give more background on why this is better and the business benefits. I'm going to compare development timelines, which I think are very important. You develop much faster this way. And I'm going to go in depth into the architecture and choices and things we had to change, and services that we discovered, and architectures of applications that are running serverlessly. And both I'll have two applications that will be serverless at that point in time, and they should collectively be getting around 500,000 monthly uniques at that point in time. So it'll be a good proof of scalability, availability, and all that.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, listen, that one is, I'll put it in the show notes. I think it's Tuesday morning of Interop. It's like 8:30 in the morning or 8 in the morning. So, yes. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a topic we've been wanting to dig into for a while. It's good to talk to somebody who's been playing with it for a while, has played with the different services, and we may want to hit you up again once we get a little bit smarter and dig into it some more. But thank you so much for being on tonight.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Hey, if somebody doesn't get a chance to bump into you, like out at Interop or something, what's a good way to get in touch if they want to pick your brain, or how do you make yourself available to people?
Twitter, just at Joe Emison.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, listen, with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Joe and Aaron, thanks for a good conversation tonight. And folks, have a great weekend. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.